I'm taking out my phone, putting it on Do Not Disturb, and putting it away. So, do likewise with your phone and computers. Again, I've chatted with Dr. Batman and told him that I promised you that at about 10 to 5 you get what?
A break.
A break. Okay? And to earn that break, you don't sort of, you don't leave the classroom before that. You take your call. To give you full attention, the topics that have, as you say, we've moved along in our topics. We're coming down to the end of term, folks. Just about 4 more weeks, and it's Christmas, and we're out of here. Got a lot to do. And so, crunch time now. You may be tempted to take shortcuts, lose sleep, or not eat right. Dr. Batten's going to talk to you about this important connection between your gut, which people call your second brain. Okay? And there's a direct connection between your brain up here that you know about and your gut. And we're finding out more and more how important that connection is. And so you've got to look after your brain, you've got to look after your gut. And so, very glad that again Dr. Batten has taken time out of his schedule to come and give his expertise on this topic. So, pay attention, take good notes. You get to use your notes in the final exam. Not other people's notes, your notes. The quality of your notes matters. So, okay? Also, one big note, thank you to those who started uploading your reports of service activities. I see there's some more there. I'll get to them and start grading here quickly. So thank you for doing that. A reminder to the rest of you to upload them if you haven't already. Dr. Batten, thank you.
Thank you all for coming today. I just wanted to start with a word of prayer. If you don't mind, as part of your break, you can do an activity. Is that okay? A physical activity. No, physical activities are great. Anyway, we'll see. We'll see how we fit that in, but you'll get a break. Okay, so let's have a word of prayer first, and then we'll start. Father in heaven, we're thankful for the opportunity to learn a little bit more about how our bodies work and how we can keep them in optimal shape. Lord, we pray that you would be here among us, help us learn from you ultimately, because you are a designer, and help us to remember that we're fearfully and wonderfully made, and when we cooperate with what you've given us as our fuel and the instructions you've given us how to take good care of our bodies, that our minds will work well as well. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so yeah, as was alluded to, you're going to have exams coming up eventually. Some of you have had tests, midterms, all that has happened already. But hopefully some of the habits that we're going to talk about today will maybe help you if you haven't applied them in the future. Obviously you haven't applied them yet for the future, but if you haven't applied them in the past, maybe it'll change your habits so that you'll apply some of these in the future. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of a background as to why the gut is important and how we can best influence your gut health. You've probably heard about the gut microbiome. Hopefully this will be somewhat of an information session to help you bring you up to speed with what that is. And then we'll touch on a little bit more about how lifestyle influences that and how there is a connection between the gut and the brain. So our learning objectives for this first section, what is the influence? Understand a little bit about the influence of diet on the metabolites produced by bacteria. So what are metabolites? These are things the bacteria, the microbes, will turn into, they will take the foods we eat and they will, just like us, digest those foods and do things with them. Look at some of, what are those microbial metabolites? You're not going to have to memorize them. I'm pretty sure your professors in this class are not going to force you to memorize all these specific details, but it's good to just idea that they're real. And then identify some strategies, simple strategies, basic strategies to optimize your gut microbes and their metabolites. So that's the first part. First, this is an area that I think there's a lot of annotation of things. So what do we mean by microbiota? Microbiota, these are the trillions of microorganisms, not just bacteria. Bacteria, archaea, viruses, fungi, protists, other eukaryotes. Some of you in biology, this makes sense. If you're not in biology, don't worry. Lots of different things, right? These microbiota are found in our bodies. And the vast majority of them are found in our gastrointestinal tract. Now, when we say microbiome, technically that is meaning the genetic content of those. So all of the genetics of these organisms. So what do we know about the microbiota? Well, it turns out that there are over 100 trillion cells in our body, and that's just an estimate. There probably are many more. The gut microbiome remains incompletely charted, so we don't actually know all of them. So that's just to give you an idea that it's a lot of black matter there. We have about 3,600 high-quality genomes. That means in the human microbiota, there's probably 3,600 other organisms other than you that could be living on you. But you as an individual probably only have about 200, okay, extra ones that are living in and on you, approximately. Now, just under 17% of the gut microbiome has actually been, is actually totally unassigned. So it's just this dark matter. We don't even know what it is. So there's lots of room for discovery, just in case you're wondering if this is an area where you could study more. And there's probably a lot more to be learned. So what about these fungi, protists, viruses? I'm not going to talk much about them because not a lot is known about them in terms of their effects on our health, other than a few top, key ones. So there are, maybe some of you have heard of baker's yeast, like or brewer's yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae. This is a yeast that can cause yeast infections. Also, you have Candida albicans. This is another yeast that can cause infections. These are found in the gut too, but notice it's only about 0.1% of total species. And there are protists. What are these? These are like sometimes parasites. I was just talking in microbiology class about this. Sometimes there are parasites, but not all of them are bad. Many of them can actually be beneficial. And then viruses. So it turns out viruses are not just things like SARS coronavirus that infected us all around the world for a while there. We have viruses that actually infect bacteria. So because there are so many different types of viruses, or different types of bacteria, you can expect there to be many different types of viruses that can infect those bacteria. So we have those as well. And notice there's 189,680 different graft viral genomes in the human sort of virome, if you will, and 54,118 viral species and growing. So there's just many, many, many of them. Most of them infect bacteria. So when we look at ourselves, we are, I don't know if we actually look like this, we don't, but in terms of genetics, we are vastly outnumbered by our microbes. So approximately 2 billion plus genes representing the different organisms that live in and on us. We only have about 23,000 genes ourselves. So you are more microbe than man or woman. But why does this matter and why is this interesting? Well, it turns out when you look at your genetics, so if you try to compare yourself to the person next to you, you're actually very, very similar genetically. Okay? About 99.9% the same. You might think that's crazy, but it's true. Even though you look very different, you have very, very similar genetics. Okay? However, when it comes to your microbiome, you're actually very different. So notice, 80 to 90% different, 10 to 20% the same. Now that's depends on how we define the same and different, but that is what's happening. So the differences between you and I could actually have more to do with microbes we have than our actual genetics. That's kind of weird, huh? So now this presents a problem as well, because you have to ask yourself, the person sitting next to you is probably relatively healthy, right? They're alive, they're not dead, they're they're doing okay. Maybe they don't.
Who's dead?
Maybe they don't have. Maybe they don't have the exact same, I don't know, athletic ability as you or whatever. But they're still actually quite, generally healthy, right? So when you look at one generally healthy person and another generally healthy person, their microbiomes could be very different. So now the question becomes, well, wait a minute, what's a healthy microbiome? What does it mean to have healthy bacteria? Kind of weird, right, to even understand that. So we're starting to realize that because of this genetic similarity, of course it's easy to understand genetic cause of disease in terms of human genetics, but when we talk about the microbiome, you have to be really, really careful. There's going to be a lot of people out there that tell you, oh, you just take this pill, take this probiotic, do this whatever, it's going to change your microbiome and you're going to be healthy. Take it with a grain of salt because it's actually an ecosystem that's in your body and it's been there for a long time and it doesn't shift easily. It's like taking elephants and taking them to the boreal forest and trying to put them there and say, hey, live here, it'll be fine. They won't survive, right? It's not going to work well for them because they don't thrive in that particular environment. So it's a very sort of nebulous area. One thing though, which you might find crazy, you see what I have written at the bottom there? Fecal microbial transplants. Okay. Yes. You is kind of right. So a fecal microbial transplant is basically taking, for lack of a better way of saying it, the whole feces, which contains a lot of different types of microbes, basically the whole ecosystem, and transplanting that from one person to another, or from one animal to another. This is, you might think this is crazy if we would ever do that. Any of you heard of this? Yes, some of you heard of this. It's actually a real thing. It works very well for certain infections. Why? Because you're transplanting the entire ecosystem. So now it can actually work together and continue to function. If you don't give it all its parts, sadly it doesn't necessarily work as well. So this is an area that even drug regulators are scratching their heads about, is how are you going to make this work, right? But fecal microbial transplants are a real thing in there, and they're probably going to be used more in the future as well. So what is a healthy microbiome? You could look at this baby is trying to figure it out too. I have the same question, right? So if we look at microbiome changes in the same person as they go from sickness to health, maybe that would help us understand what a healthy microbiome is. And I take a person who's relatively sick, put them on a program, help them get better, and then maybe at the end, check their microbiome again, and maybe we can see what changed, right? Does that make sense? So we tried this, actually, I'm just going to give you one example. So this was a depression and anxiety program that we looked at, what's interesting about this, you might already have the answer based on that difference between people. If we look at these people, okay, their depression scores went significantly down. This is a residential depression recovery program run in Wayne, North California. We got stools before and after the program from these people that were willing to give them. God bless them for being willing to give their stools. And then we did this extraction and found that sure enough their microbiota could be identified. But they had significant decreases in their anxiety and depression, so we knew that they were getting healthier in terms of their depression. However, look at this now. Can this make any sense to any one of us? Well, not really, because everyone's very different, right? So look at all the different colors. Those represent different species of microbes. We did some pretty deep sequencing. The top 10 species, we tried to bootstrap them to top 10 species, but they're different, very different from one person to the next. So yes, there were changes. So this is before and after, before and after, before and after. There were changes in relative amounts of different species of bacteria. Well, what does that mean? Probably not a lot, right? Well, but maybe those bacteria, just like the person who went through the program got healthy, maybe those bacteria are starting to get healthy, right? That's what we believe. That's my hypothesis anyway, to be continued, because this hasn't yet been published. So we're still working on this. But the point that comes from this is, does it matter who it is as much as what they're doing? So bacteria, just like you and I, we have the potential to do things. Like if I'm given the right food, I can convert that food into something that's going to be energetic and allow me to do useful things, like kick a soccer ball in a net or whatever. Some of you might be playing soccer, I don't know. So these are functions that we can do as a response to the nutrition that we're given. Maybe microbes are the same. Maybe if we expose sort of bad bacteria or ones that are not as healthy to good foods, they might change and sort of convert into these good bacteria that can then help our bodies in other ways. Well, this is where metabolites come in. Because metabolites are the things that the bacteria produce. We know from Scripture, Matthew 7, verse 20 says, by their fruits you know them, right? So by what you produce, that's how you understand the value or the importance of a particular person, or in this case, bacteria, right? So how is our gut microbiota established and maintained? We've got to take a step back now and figure out, wait a minute, what foods help, or what fruits are the result of the foods that are given early on in life? Maybe if we look at the way our bacteria are established early in life, maybe that'll help us understand how they should be maintained in the future. So at the very beginning of your life, you pass through the birth canal, okay? You don't remember that for good reason, right? It's not one of those memories, oh yeah, remember that time when, anyways. It's not one of those things and God in His mercy allowed us to not remember that moment. However, that is the time when our bacteria populates us, right? The bacteria that is present on mom is going to get seeded onto the child. And now the baby doesn't just enter a world that's sterile, right? The world has lots of bacteria around it as well. So the infant then, well, it's been seeded by this mother's microbiota, if you will, also gets fed breast milk and is in close contact with mom to allow for this new sort of growth of these bacteria. It takes about 3 years to develop a stable microbiota. We'll look at that in a minute. But interestingly, what was found, and this was back in the 1900s, okay, so a long, long time ago, this researcher, Tissier, what he found was that breastfed infants actually had more acidic stools, so their stools had a lower pH, and compared to cow's milk-fed infants. And in the stools, he found these bifurcated, look like little Ys, right? You see those little Ys? These Y-shaped bacteria called bifidobacteria. That's what they call them later because they're bifurcated. We call them bifidobacteria, and they're in large quantities in these breastfed infant stools. And it turned out that infants that didn't have these high quantities of the bifidobacteria seemed to get more sick. They got other sicknesses. So what's going on here? Well, this is where we enter the realm of probiotics and prebiotics. Many of you have heard of probiotics, right? Probiotics are those things like you get yogurt, you go to the grocery store, you buy yogurt, maybe you buy kefir, maybe you buy, I don't know what you buy, certain cheeses, whatever they have so-called probiotic benefits. Maybe some of you have used like kimchi or sauerkraut. Any other things that have probiotics in them that you can think of? Trying to engage you here. What are the drinks that people like to drink that are kombucha, right? There you go, I knew somebody would have that. So kombucha is one of those things that contains so-called probiotics, and they'll say like, this contains 50 billion, live, yeah, exactly. And it may or may not, yes, but
it's saying a lot of things that are take the process of fermentation.
Fermentation, yes. So we're going to talk about fermentation, because fermentation is not always bad. In fact, fermentation in our gut is very good. And fermentation of things like sauerkraut or kimchi actually results in more of these good, healthy bacteria, right? So it's good you bring up fermentation, because what's happening is probiotics are the live microorganisms. When administered in adequate amounts, provide some kind of health benefit. Prebiotics are the substrates that are used by host microorganisms that confer health benefits. So prebiotics are eaten by probiotics. They're like the food for them. They provide the sustenance for these. So if you want to promote good, healthy bacteria, this is where you want to start. You want to start with the good prebiotics. That's the stuff that that actually is the food for these good bacteria. So when we think, going back to mother's milk, right? Now mother's milk contains something you would never think is found in milk, okay? And that stuff you find in mother's milk is called fiber. Do you think of milk as a source of fiber? Probably not, right? But it is actually human mother's milk. Human mother's milk contains soluble fiber. It's a type of sort of digestible oligosaccharide. Now you don't have to remember the whole name, but HMO for short, human milk oligosaccharides. These are non-digestible soluble fibers found in mother's milk. There's also lots of fats. There's also lots of protein. There's also lots of lactose, right? Sugar, probiotics, millions or hundreds of different bacterial species, and then there's exosomes, stem cells, lots of other stuff. You don't have to remember all this, but key in on the different human milk sugars. Now, it's not just one type of fiber. This isn't just like, actually there's a whole smorgasbord of, okay, memorize this, right, for the test. But the point is, there's a lot of variety. That's the point. There's a lot of variety of fibers in mother's milk. Even though it's just kind of white looking, well, it doesn't have the color, but it's definitely got different varieties. Huge variety of them. Well, what are these for? Well, they feed those Y-shaped bifurcated bacteria, bifidobacteria. They get fed this good fiber, and that actually helps them grow, and so they become established in the gut. Also, there's a whole bunch of other good things that happen. There's an induction of expression of mucus. What are these? The mucus lining of your gut that keeps it, the barrier intact, that gets made thicker as you make more of these bifidobacteria there. You get more expression of tight junction proteins. Now, tight junction proteins, I don't know if we have a marker here. Do we have a marker? Oh, yeah, we do. So, you can imagine you have cells of your intestine, right? Lining your intestine here. And this is the inside of your intestine, right? And this is your bloodstream here, right? Let's just call this your blood. So there's a lot of bacteria here, okay? And food waste, let's call it that. Poop, okay, is in here. You don't want that going in your blood, right? You wouldn't put poop in your blood, right? Okay, so this is actually only one cell layer thick. Okay, these are the cells. Okay, so only one cell layer thick. Another cell here, right? Another cell here. These are well zippered together. Okay, they have these little, we call them tight junctions, to help keep them stuck together. If they don't stick together, poop goes in. Okay, simple. So you want this sticking together. Amen? Right? So, so that's what happens here. You get this zippering together of the cells to prevent the bacteria from getting into your blood. And that's a good thing. Now, there's other things. You have proliferation of intestinal epithelial stem cells. You have modulation of immune function. You have all this other good stuff that happens, which I'm not going to spend tons of time on. The point is, if you have a variety of good fibers in your mother's milk or in your diet, we're going to touch on that now, soon, that will help provide the microbial diversity here that's going to help keep this is where the mucus layer will be, and we'll look at some pictures of that later. So the mucus here, right, is there to help also be a barrier. And that dietary diversity is going to help you have a good microbial diversity that has lots of healthy microbes. It's going to keep you healthy, keep your inflammation low. Because guess what? When you get poop in your blood, it causes your body to freak out. Not surprising, because your body is like, what is this doing in my bloodstream, right? And it will get inflamed, which is what we see here. So we want a good, healthy human microbiota. And as I touched on, this is primarily found in our gut. Most of the bacteria are found there, 95%. There's over 3,600 different species that have been identified. You have about 200. Your gastrointestinal system, you might think it's small. It's actually bigger than your, how big is the square footage of your dorm room? Small, right? 344 square feet is probably a generous dorm room, I don't know, pretty generous. It's a large surface area that these bacteria are interacting with you through. So these human milk sugars, what happens is they provide food for these bifidobacteria, and this is the interesting thing. Remember we touched on metabolites. Metabolites, what are metabolites? They're the things that the bacteria make from the food they eat. So they eat your food that you eat and the fibers, and they turn into metabolites. Well, one of those metabolites is a group of molecules called short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs. Now, these are very, very good for you, and we'll touch on them more in a minute. But by 3 years old, this bacterial population stabilizes, and if it's a healthy one or a good one, then it prevents these autoimmune diseases. Now, defining what a healthy one is hard, but we do know bifidobacteria are prominent. So once you wean yourself, because how many of you are drinking mom's milk still? Oh, there's somebody over here. Okay, who are you? You're getting good nutrition still, right? Your mom is pretty committed. But anyways, what I'm saying is, you are needing to transition to food that contains fiber, that has good fiber for your for continuing to feed these good bacteria. And those bacteria will change in the type and so forth, but they're going to behave well if you keep giving them like this bowl of Saskatoon berries or lots of nice vegetables and fruits. We'll look at some examples of some foods that you eat. However, their meat, on the other hand, though it is, some find it as a source of protein and so forth, unfortunately it has really zero fiber. Meat is a fiberless compound. It just doesn't contain. So dead animals do not contain fiber. They just don't in their yes, question.
It sounds as though like in a clinical case, microbiome making the diet just like suppressed.
Exactly.
So how can, let's say, the current diet, another diet, or the liver, maybe with that chance or
Right.
liver diet? Is it possible for like with a good diet for this or?
Yes, and actually we don't wait till then yet. What we do now is we supplement. So now that we know this information, all of the formulas that you get contain soluble fiber. So inulin, short-chain fructose oligosaccharides, food-derived fiber. It won't be the smorgasbord that's found in your mother's milk because she just has an amazing ability of making many different things. But it certainly is helpful to support some of these good bacteria. So, some of you maybe are wondering, how am I alive? I was formula fed. It's because you're very resilient and it's possible for you to get the nutrition you need from formula as well, but the formulas that have been designed even probably since you were a child have these, taken these things into account. So it's a good question. So meat, on the other hand, though it is not containing fiber, it still provides nutrition for some of the bacteria in our gut. Now those bacteria will convert that meat into things that are not so healthy. Okay, so we call them putrefactive byproducts. Putrescine is one of them, a few others. Deoxycholic acid, which is deoxycholate, is one of the products, actually is a carcinogen. So we know now why there's this red meat sort of colon cancer link, partly because of what's going on there. So during weaning, as I mentioned, normally you have a mix of solid and pureed foods and breast milk, and that starts to occur, and then finally you shift towards sort of a diet that's hopefully high in fiber, supporting your good microbial population there. So what are some foods to best support this? Well, foods that contain fiber. Now here you can see breakfast happening here. You have what, you could eat this for supper too, I suppose. But you've got some raspberries, you've got some nuts, you've got some whole grains, hopefully some cereal, some other things. Well, where is the fiber in this food? Well, let's look at what fiber is. So fiber has different types. And when you think of fiber, you probably think of the roughage. That's why you didn't think of milk containing fiber. You're thinking of like, a salad, right? You just got chunks of green stuff in it. And that's fiber. Well, that's not the whole picture. The fiber that you really want is the soluble fiber found inside of the plant cells. So this is why I tell you, chew your food, okay? Why? Because if you chew your food well, you're crushing the cells of the plant and releasing the soluble fiber. Does that make sense? More chewing, more fiber release. Okay? Simple. Now, so inside the plant cell, you have these starch granules and also resistant starch granules. You don't have to memorize all the names of these. There's glycolisaccharide, fructolisaccharide, all these different things. But inside, you have these kind of gold that you're trying to mine and feed your good bacteria. They're going to help. That's going to help feed those good bugs. Now, is this other fiber that's just the cell wall material bad? No, it's good too. It's going to help bulk your stool and help it pass as well. But it's not the gold you're trying to get through chewing your food, if that makes sense. So, what are some benefits? Here's a picture of what I was trying to draw here, just a little bit nicer. So notice you have these bacteria on this side, and you've been feeding them fiber. They start turning it into a short-chain fatty acid. Now, this is one type called butyrate. Butyrate tells your intestinal cells and also the immune cells underneath, hey, don't worry. These bacteria are good. We're having a nice time here. Everybody's happy. So inflammation is dampened, and your body is happy and doing fine. On the other hand, if you don't feed fiber to your bacteria, what do? Simply put, they eat your mucus. Okay? It's a simple way of seeing it. They eat your mucus instead because it's kind of like fiber. And once they've eaten it, it's gone. Then they start eating you, right? Okay? Simply put. And if they start eating you, then they start leaking in. And remember, we talked about this. You don't want your poop in your blood because it's not helpful, right? So that's kind of the idea. The problem that comes with the thinning mucus layer when we don't feed our good bugs the fiber that we need. So, butyrate. I mentioned butyrate. You don't have to memorize all these. I just want you, for your information, butyrate is an incredibly amazing thing. You might think I should just eat butter because butyrate is actually found in butter, believe it or not. But that won't help you because that is going to get absorbed high up in your intestinal system and it won't get down deeper. So you want butyrate that's down in your colon, which is produced by the bacteria. So butyrate acts as a food source for colon cells. So this is a cool thing. The bacteria take the fiber, which you cannot get energy from, right? They take that fiber, they turn it into something that you can get energy from, which is butyrate. So you can add, so the colon cells lining your gut, they rely on bacteria for energy. It's kind of like this symbiosis. It's an amazing thing. Also, when they use that kind of metabolism, it's incompatible with cancer. So when we talk about cancer happening in the gut, the type of metabolism that is promoted by this fiber metabolism is not compatible with cancer. It's pretty amazing. Production of IL-10, that's an anti-inflammatory cytokine, promoting proliferation of Treg cells. These are dampening inflammation, directly decreasing expression of genes involved in inflammation. So it's just like anti-inflammatory reactions. But notice this. More expression of mucin, so thicker layer here. That's a great thing. But brain inflammation also is affected. Wait a minute. Isn't this happening in our gut? Weird. Well, are we ready for a break almost? No? Yeah. Is it break time? Okay, break time. So, for break time, you guys can have a break. Yay. I wanted to do take 2 for you exercise for you, but you can come back in like 8 minutes and we'll do 2 minutes of exercise. Does that work?
Okay, 5-minute break.
Was it 5 minutes?
5 minutes. Please be on time. Okay? That's 5 minutes. Please be on time.
I'm not moving. Not because I'm moving.
There's so much to learn. Oh, you always do. I do too. My grandpa.
No, you guys are wrong. When it goes out, just walk. When he's gonna take it out, he's gonna I'll try.
With your
Well, this stuff will change so fast. Yeah, so I think, yeah, part of that is because we're not educating our youth.
From reception?
So that hygiene, hypothesis, less exposure to good bacteria and bad bacteria, the less our body. Now, change. It used to be that peanuts, you never exposed to peanuts and they changed it. 6 months, now it's like as soon as possible. So it goes early or it's bad. Your body's developing tolerance to stuff. Yeah, that's what they have this fear of. And the other thing that's incredibly interesting is allergies can be undone somehow. I don't want to say all of it, but it has to happen through desensitization process. Yeah, so I think through, through all things, exposure, your body does learn, but you have to be careful how you interact. It actually brings up an interesting point. One diagnose, repeated exposure, tolerance of greenhouse gases, no longer health. And lots of things. It's not exactly the same, but it's similar. So that's actually a great question, and I foods have no such a fact that you know when you have all of the time. So I would say that probably the variety of adjustment is probably but it's yeah. Cows and humans, that's interesting. I'm not sure. We've definitely done the opposite of it. But cows are interesting and they bring that up as less variety of fibers. Yeah, so it's like there's only 30 different major
Okay, we need to gather. Stretch it out. Wake up. Pay attention, please.
I'm not going to do it now because you just had your 5 minutes, right? But if you ever need, just, you don't have a lot of time and you're studying for exams and you're trying to cram, that will never happen, right?
No.
Okay? Okay. You need to take a little break, right? This is very important to have a break. So when you take a break, go for a walk outside or go outside, do 2 minutes straight, if possible, of squats. Okay? You can do squats like 2 minutes or 2 minutes. You will find your legs are burning, and yeah, you will get here. And actually, the interesting thing is blood pressure change another picture of the same thing I've shown you. I'm just trying to tell you multiple different ways. You have a fiber-rich diet, so this is what they did. In this study, they took human microbes and they transplanted them into mice that were in a sterile environment. So these mice had never had a microbiome. They transplanted these human microbes into mouse, so they humanized the mouse. Then they gave them either lots of fiber or not much fiber. And those with the fiber-enriched diet had a thick mucus layer, and they had lots of good bacteria up there. Those with the fiber-free diet had this thinner mucus layer, and they were easily infected with these pathogens. So just an interesting thing that having this dietary fiber in our is really important. And you might wonder, why do I keep harping on this? Because actually the diet that most of us in North America have is really, really low in fiber. You don't eat much fiber. We eat refined foods, fiber-free stuff. Yeah, pizzas, not a lot of whole foods in our diet, and that's an issue. So how much fiber do you need? This might be a question you have. Well, adult women, about 28 grams a day. Adult men, 35 grams a day. What does that actually look like? Eating lots of fruits and vegetables. That's what it looks like. Just going, I know that it's a little expensive, but try to go to the salad bar if you use with that. Or go and make your own giant salad. Salad's not expensive. Go get some kale, some arugula, some whatever. Get some spinach. Make yourself a big salad. You'd be surprised you can get that fiber in pretty quick. There's other things, onions and stuff we'll look at in a minute. Notice 40 grams is actually just fine. This is the recommendation. You could even have up to 100 grams a day. That's what the suggestion is, that in the past, people used to eat that much. But notice, average American intake only 15 grams. That's like half or less than half of what we need in terms of fiber. So try to consider fiber. Now, which fibers? Okay, so we have a fancy term, MAX, and that's not like Big Macs. Okay. Microbiome accessible carbohydrates. So these are fibers that bacteria can access. And the soluble fibers are significant in this area. So what are the soluble fibers? Well, these shorter chain microbiome accessible carbohydrates, called short chain fructooligosaccharides, or galactooligosaccharides, or even inulin. These are found in things like beans, in chicory root, in onions, in leeks, in garlic. Anybody used Jerusalem artichokes? Have you heard of that? Yeah, you've heard of them. Those things are packed with inulin. I mean, it's like the king of fiber sources. Okay, so also, if you take too many too quickly, you're going to have some gas. Okay, so be careful. Don't overdo it. Right? But gradually add more fiber. Onions and leeks, you'd be surprised. Garlic, tremendous source of inulin. Okay? So there's lots of different varieties of foods. You don't have to eat food you don't like to eat fiber. There are thousands of different fiber-rich foods. Just pick your favorites and eat them. We're not too scared. So interestingly, plant fibers are pretty complex. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. You might think scientists have actually figured out all the fibers, but they haven't. We haven't even done the chemistry to know what all the different fibers are. There's just so many different ones. University of California, Davis is developing this Davis Food Glycopedia, so they're trying to figure out all the fibers in different foods. A lot of research is focused on just specific soluble fibers like short chain fructooligosaccharides, inulin, those kinds of ones. Resistant starches are also really important. So where are these? Well, we find them in beans as well. We find them in potatoes. We find them in places like inside plants, of course. Interestingly, legumes and pulse in particular is really rich in these different types of resistant starches. There's 3 main forms of resistant starch. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but you could become a fiber, scientist and just study that. But what's amazing about these different forms of resistant starches, they're all present in the pulses, and you can then have certain ways you process the pulse can influence, like let's say the way you cook it, the way you process it, whether you have it more raw or less raw. all these things influence the state of that particular starch.
Define a pulse for me.
Pulse. So pulses are like lentils, beans, chickpeas. They're so yeah. In comparison, are you thinking about like in comparison to something or yeah? What you see in the picture here, yes, is the best definition.
I know beans, but
Yeah,
are beans one of the pulses or
yeah. Beans would be pulses. Yeah.
are peas, green peas?
Yeah, peas, split peas, yeah, they would be pulses as well. So they're yeah, and it's a good point because somebody might, have different definitions of pulses. But yes, the peas, the beans, and the lentils are all pulses. Oh, pardon? Yes, exactly. The stuff that Daniel ate, that's a good definition in Daniel chapter 1. The diet of water and vegetables. Now, starch is a complex thing. I just wanted you to see this because it's really cool. You don't have to take note of this. But look at the chemistry. What's happening is these molecules, these sugar molecules, are getting packed really tightly into these little balls, and the balls are really tightly packed. And this surface of this ball is actually the only part that's accessible. So what happens is there are different bacteria. Some bacteria can eat the outside of the ball, and then other bacteria can eat what's inside, and so they actually work together. I'm not going to spend forever on this, but you have these primary degraders, secondary degraders, cross feeders. So it's like this whole ecology happening, where the part of the starch is getting eaten, and then the next bacteria can come in and eat the next part, and then the next one can come in. It's kind of like you think about ecology. Some of you may be taking ecology classes, or even in biology later, you'll talk about ecosystems, and it's really incredible how they form this complex ecosystem, sort of feeding off of each other's byproducts and so forth. Don't spend forever on this, but there's interdependent activity here. Now, notice one type of soluble fiber, this is amazing, will actually promote competitive exclusion. Now, what is that? Well, think about it this way. If you have healthy bacteria in your gut and they're there, if some other bacteria that's not part of the community shows up, like an elephant in the boreal forest, right, is not going to survive because it doesn't have the resources allowed for it. There's no niche for it to fill in. It has no home. So eating the good bacteria actually promotes their growth, and they're going to prevent the bad guys from coming in. They're just going to bounce off and be like, well, there's no space for you. It's kind of an exclusive club, right? Your bacteria in your gut have made their home there, and they're not going to allow others to take over. Erica and Justin Sonnenberg, husband and wife team from Stanford University, who've done a ton of research on the microbiota. They said this: don't starve your microbial self. Feed your microbes. Feed them; they will take care of you. And then, of course, we did other studies. I'll just show you one example. That feeding the microbes is not the only benefit of fiber. Fiber actually directly affects these tight junctions, independent of the microbiota, and also decreases inflammation. So we did some studies back a while ago showing that if you give fiber directly to cells on a monolayer, they will actually produce less IL-6 in response to, which is an inflammatory marker in response to a bacterial threat, if you will. So, on the flip side, animal-based diets could release or increase toxic metabolite production. I mentioned deoxyfolate. This is just one example of one of those toxic metabolites. So, not so good. So this is a recap of our diet, microbiota stuff. And then we're going to talk about lifestyle a little bit. So, fiber is good. I hope you got that message pretty clear. Feeds the good microbes, keeps them happy and not eating your mucus layers. Fiber also feeds good microbes, and they in turn feed your colon with the metabolites they produce, right? These short-chain fatty acids. And that will dampen inflammation, things like butyrate. Fiber also directly signals your intestinal epithelium to tell it to also dampen inflammation, but also form tighter junctions here so that the poop doesn't get in your blood, right? Okay, so our next point here, whatever's good for your gut turns out is also good for your brain, okay? So when you have neuroinflammation, sounds like a big term, but basically inflammation of your brain, right? This can be a problem. And turns out that a a lot of psychiatric disorders we have are actually linked to inflammation of our brain. So wait, is there a connection between the inflammation in our gut and the inflammation in our brain? Possibly. So it turns out that gut inflammation leads to dysfunction of this brain immune cells. And you may not be aware, but the brain does have its own immune cells. They're called microglia. They're cells that can sort of activate and go and when they're inflamed, they can do some things in your brain. Unfortunately, if the microglia are getting out of control, it can cause problems in your brain. So actually, if you get short-chain fatty acids made in your gut, it seems to turn off that inflammation in your brain. So there's this kind of reversion that can take place by administering short-chain fatty acids. So we have a term for when things are going wrong with your gut. We call it dysbiosis. So when it's an imbalance, dysbiosis. Microbial dysbiosis is this imbalance in the microbial communities. That's been linked actually to anxiety, depression, neurodevelopmental disorders, autism spectrum disorder, neurodegenerative disorders. It's connected to a lot of things. So there's a lot of research on this. However, we don't have clear causality yet, but the animal studies in humans, but animal studies are pretty compelling. So how do we best support our microbes to give us good brain health? Well, there are some special foods that are high in phytochemicals, colorful fruits. And I think that there's kind of something genius there. Maybe God, in His mercy or in His wisdom, said, hey, you know what? People are attracted to different colors. Maybe I should make the good foods different colors so they'll take to eat them. And sure enough, it's actually the colors themselves that can be very beneficial. So particularly those with intense color have these bioactive phytochemicals. If not absorbed before the colon, these reach the microbiota, and they actually then get metabolized into some really good molecules. Here's an example of something else you need to memorize, right? So all these different plant phytochemicals, notice there's one, actually the anthocyanins here are really quite fascinating, but there's so many different types, it's just amazing, and again, we don't even have them all characterized, but they have many health benefits. And interestingly, these molecules then get converted by bacteria into other molecules that also are beneficial. So it's kind of like the issue with the fiber. Now, when we think about healthy microbiota, we have some principles here. Don't count your calories, okay? A lot of you might be like, oh man, I don't think you're in that stage now. Most of you probably don't count your calories. Don't worry too much. Food is more than just the fuel. Think about what you're eating. So eat the rainbow, more polyphenols. 30 or more different whole plant foods per week. Is that a rule you could do? Different ones, right? 30 or more different whole plant foods per week. Consume fermented foods. We talked about kimchi, we talked about sauerkraut, maybe some probiotics in other foods, kombucha maybe. Leave at least 12 hours between your last and your first meal. Avoid ultra-processed foods. Avoid blood sugar spikes. Does this sound like stuff your mom used to tell you, or your dad, or maybe your grandma? You know what's crazy? This is coming from the latest research from Zoe Science and Nutrition, where they've been doing like personalized nutrition plans for hundreds of thousands of people. And they're finding that these are the rules that help people have a healthy microbiota. So the simple way, God's way, is actually, God said, behold, I've given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth, every tree in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for me. Of every tree in the garden you may freely eat. Genesis 2:16. Freely. So don't stop yourself. And you can eat lots. You know, you'd be surprised how many apples you have to eat to overeat in calories. It's a lot. Like, yeah. It's just the bulk of the food is there. It's not processed. And notice, I like this. I just drew it at the bottom. You know, I made the colorful ones easy to pick out because they're the best. Okay, so now I'm going to spend the last just few minutes talking about lifestyle factors. Okay, so our points here are looking at specific lifestyle habits and their effect on the microbiota and also on our health, and identifying some of those and appreciating how lifestyle and diet actually intermingle. So you guys have all heard of these different principles of nutrition, exercise, water, sunlight, news, start, right? Probably heard this. Well, going back to the nutrition part just briefly, because it's kind of a homegrown story here, so to speak. We do have on campus, we have some berries, Haskap berries that are rich in anthocyanins. Here's a picture of them. Have you guys seen Haskap berries? Heard of them? Fantastic, good tasting berries, high in anthocyanins, and we'll get to about 4 times what you find in the blueberry. There they are. They taste really good. You should try some. They actually grow. Unfortunately, right now in the snow, they're not growing very much, right? But they're down the lower field and then up by facility maintenance. We have two different plots. And these berries are, the birds love them, so we have to cover them with nets because otherwise they'll all be gone. But we find that, and I actually did a more careful test to see, the anthocyanin content of Haskap berries are actually somewhere between 3 to 4 times the amount we find in blueberry. So there's quite a lot in there, these antioxidants. And they also have lots of vitamin C and stuff, that you can look at that, don't worry. But one thing we found, and this might be interesting to you, is that eating these high anthocyanin-rich food, plus, in the case of flaxseed, we found increased attention. Some of your professors might prescribe this to you, right? So you have an improvement, a slight improvement in attention in the, that was statistically significant for the Haskap and flaxseed. Unfortunately, with just Haskaps, it wasn't enough, so there was this flaxseed benefit effect that we saw with them together. Could be the flaxseed is a major determinant there because of the omega-3, but certainly we found that. So that was kind of interesting. We haven't published this yet, so please don't tell us. Anyways, that's okay. Tell whoever you want, it's fine. Okay, so now we have, as I was mentioning, you have this gut-brain axis going back and forth between the two. And how do we know that there's a gut-brain axis? Everybody talks about it. Oh, there's a gut-brain axis. Well, is that really true? I don't know, right? Let's see. Well, I talked about, remember the fecal microbial transplants? Well, it turns out that if you take a fecal transplant of someone with major depressive disorder and you give that to a mouse, the mouse starts behaving depressed. Okay. Wait, yeah, isn't that crazy? Yeah, it's actually true. This happens, okay? Now if you take a depression-associated person, okay? So let's say your mind, you might say, okay, well that's the gut brain, right? What about brain gut? Does the brain affect my microbes? Well, yes, it does. If you take depression, someone with depression-associated pathological changes, that can actually lead to dysbiosis and make it worse. And then finally, what we are starting to see with human trials actually more recently is that people, for example, who have diarrhea, and sometimes diarrhea can be depressing. Okay? All right? People with diarrhea, dominant IBS. Okay, so IBS is not just like one bout of diarrhea. It's like you're getting diarrhea pretty frequently and it's pretty annoying, right? So it turns out if you give these people some of this FMT, this fecal microbial transplant from healthy supercoopers, right? That's another term that I'll tell you about later. They will actually improve their depression symptoms, even if their diarrhea doesn't improve. Well, that's kind of interesting. Now they have these oral frozen FMT capsules. I don't know if you can convince me, even if they're frozen, okay? As an add-on therapy for depression symptoms, you'd have to be pretty depressed to take these anyways. So it turns out they can actually help, it seems. So lots of different possible applications, and I'm not suggesting that you go home and find someone to do donors for you, but this is a real thing. So notice the effectiveness of treatment doesn't seem to be consistent across the board, and I've seen this actually in other studies with IBD, where the quality of the community provided really matters. So there are maybe some of you have been flushing down a product that's very valuable, but there are these super poopers, we call them, people who actually make microbial communities that are really seen to be very beneficial for people in terms of ameliorating their disease. Individually tailored treatments could be possible. Specific mix of probiotics and prebiotics, we call them symbiotics, we put them together. And then we also have some preliminary studies showing that there's a variety of different disorders like stress-induced depression and rodents that can be modified through this type of approach. So, now I'm going to talk about lifestyle really briefly because there's only like, what, what's the 5:25? Is that what we're at? No, 5:30. Yes, you're ready to leave. Exercise. Okay, does exercise help? Does exercise have anything to do with your microbiota? Yes, it does. So, exercise definitely does. You have more tryptophan. And what happens with more tryptophan? Well, tryptophan is the precursor for serotonin, very important for your brain function. If you have more exercise, you have more circulation. You deliver it to your brain. You have brain-derived neurotrophic factor. What does this have to do with the microbiome? Well, it turns out this passage of tryptophan up to our gut, turns out we'll get more tryptophan up into from our gut to our brain if we exercise, because we have less of it breaking down by the microbiota. Another thing which you might think is crazy, but water, it's so simple. Drinking your water. Just take a cup of water, drink it. Why? Because this layer here, if you add water to it, it thickens. Okay? It's kind of like an automatic sponge. Add water, it's thicken. Do you want that thick? Yes, because you don't want, I don't want to say it again, poop in your blood, right? So, simple. And that's actually been seen as another form of the immune system. It's just having a thicker mucus layer based on more water. And actually, if you hydrate your gut, you'll notice you'll go to the washroom more regularly, you'll not be as constipated, and it clears the junk out more easily. So it's actually a very simple way to keep our gut happy. This was just a study showing that. Kind of fascinating. Back to that picture again, you want that thick mucus layer. Okay, what does the mucus layer look like? Just throwing this at you just because some of you might be interested. In your small intestine, it's like this. In your large intestine, it's actually, there's a micro-free area that's pretty thick, and then there's an area where the microbes like to live. And that's really important that you keep that layer nice and thick and function. Okay, and finally, what about sunshine? Sunshine affects the microbes?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
Why? How?
The sun is good. Vitamin D. Vitamin D.
Don't laugh. Sunshine. Sunshine is very important. Actually, vitamin D has been shown to affect our gut. So we have vitamin D deficiency causing problems with our gut, colonic injury. IBD patients often exhibit lower vitamin D levels. But vitamin D is not the only thing. To tell you more about that, and some of you attend that, some of you did go to that light talk. Very fascinating. Light has a tremendous influence on our mitochondria. Not just the short wavelength light that leads to vitamin D production, but also the long wavelength light that leads to mitochondrial melatonin production, which is amazing. Okay, another story. Sleep. This is the one that's really important for you as you're coming into exam time. This was actually very recently, just like a couple weeks ago, this was proven to take place in people. So they did a study in people. At first, they showed this in mice. This was an accidental observation. They were studying circadian rhythms in mice for whatever reason, and they were just studying cerebrospinal fluid, like movement. And what they found was that at night, well actually in the daytime for mice because they sleep in the daytime, there would be this release of this fluid and it would literally wash the brain of the mice. It was like brainwashing happening at night, okay? And they're like, well, that's really weird because they were putting some fluorescent dye into the cerebrospinal fluid and then they would see it go over the brain and then it would stop during the day when they're awake. Well, why would you want to be brainwashed? Well, actually, you do want to be brainwashed because your mind is so active during the day. You're producing all these byproducts of your metabolism in your brain. And your brain, I don't know if you've ever felt that feeling of like not sleeping for 24 hours. Anybody done that? Yes? Don't do it. Okay. But if you've done the all-nighter, you know what I'm talking about. Where you're like, your brain is like, you just don't know what to think. This is what happens when you don't sleep because your brain literally needs a washing. And it happens only when you sleep. So sleep, what are the enemies of sleep? This stuff.
Yeah.
Okay? Bright lights. Okay? Your cell phone, your computer, your other computer, your whatever stuff you're looking at that's bright. I don't know. Those things are going to prevent you from sleeping properly. Stop looking at bright screens well before you go to bed. but I also learned later to not do that. It was better. Get at least some sleep. You'll consolidate your memories. Okay. Last thing I want to touch on, trust. Does trust have anything to do with our microbiota? Well, it turns out this is a study in moms. So the human milk microbiome diversity. Okay, remember the human milk contains fiber, but it also contains bacteria. And it turns out if you're stressed as a mom, your microbiota gets less diverse in your milk. Whoa, that's weird. Turns out that's the case, and they showed this in a study, and it lasts up to 12 weeks postpartum. So this stress can be inducing changes in our microbiota, and that could affect our baby. So this is a message to all you wannabe dads out there. Take care of the mom so she's not stressed, right? Important during this process. Finally, to end it with a quote from Scripture, if I haven't convinced you already, how does our thinking affect and arise from our gut? Put on, therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, bowels of mercies, okay? Bowels of mercies, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, long-suffering, forbearing one another, forgiving one another. If any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye. If you're stressed, if you're feeling anxious, if you have problems with your colleagues in class or your peers or your professors, that's going to affect your gut, that's going to affect your brain, that's going to affect your ability to perform in class. Be forgiven and forgive, right? You're gonna be surprised at how that influences you. And eating all this great diet stuff, that's only a small fraction of the picture. The biggest picture is you having that release that you have from God, and only He can give you that peace that passes all understanding. So with that, I think our time is up, at least according to me. Was it 5? What was my time limit here? 5:30. Any questions or comments? Rob?
Okay, so you know what? Chew your food.
Yep.
What food do you chew?
Vegetables.
Vegetables. Great food.